The will had been in the family archive for 11 years. Alaric Viremont had never read it in full. There was no reason to. His father was dead, the estate was his, and grief was not a thing he indulged in when there was land to manage and a title to maintain. He read it now because his solicitor had gone pale in the middle of a sentence. That alone was enough to make Alaric set down his pen. Hadley Morse had been the Viremont family's legal counsel for 31 years. He had delivered the news of Alaric's father's death without flinching. He had dissolved 3 business partnerships that went badly and negotiated a debt settlement that saved 4,000 acres from auction, all without once changing expression. The man was a monument to composure, and yet here he stood, holding a single page as though it were a loaded pistol. "There is a clause," Hadley said. "There are always clauses," Alaric replied. He stood by the study window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the ground staff move like small dark figures across the lower lawns. The November sky was the color of pewter. It suited his mood precisely. "This one was written in your father's hand. It was filed separately, a codicil, added 6 months before he died, and witnessed by his personal physician and one Reverend Aldous Crane of the Crestmore parish." Hadley paused. "It was deliberately buried, my lord. I believe that was intentional." "Buried," Alaric repeated, still watching the grounds. "And yet here it is." "Here it is," Hadley agreed. He cleared his throat. "The clause states that the Viremont estate and all entailed properties shall pass in full to the eldest legitimate heir, unless, at the time of inheritance, there exists a living natural child of the late Duke whose existence has not been formally acknowledged by the estate. In such an event, the inheritance is held in suspension until the natural child is either and I quote, brought before the estate and formally recognized, or formally waived from all claim in writing and before 2 witnesses." The silence that followed was long enough that a gust of wind knocked one of the window panes loose. Neither man moved to fix it. "He had a natural child," Alaric said. "It was not a question." "Apparently." "And no one thought to mention this." "The physician is dead. Reverend Crane has been in ill health and claims he cannot recall the details. I believe he can recall them very well and is frightened of what happens when you learn he was involved." Alaric turned from the window then. He had his father's jaw, all the Viremonts did, square and stubborn, but his mother's eyes, which were gray and very still and had a way of making the room feel smaller than it was. "How long has the estate been in suspension?" he asked. "Technically, and since the moment of your father's death." 11 years. "And no one who knew was willing to speak of it. I suspect your father counted on that. He was a man who understood the uses of silence." Alaric said nothing. He understood them too. He'd learned at his father's knee. "What are my options?" he said at last. "Find the child and have them formally acknowledge the estate, or formally waive their claim. Either satisfies the clause and releases the inheritance to you in full. And if I do neither, then the estate remains in suspension, which means it is legally vulnerable. Any creditor, any rival claimant, any interested party could petition the court to—" "Lord Cassian Rooke," Alaric said quietly. Hadley's pause was answer enough. Lord Cassian Rooke was the nearest thing to a natural predator that the nobility produced in this generation. He was 38, exceptionally well connected, and had spent the last 3 years quietly acquiring properties along the southern border of the Viremont holdings, through instruments so complicated that most barristers could not untangle them fast enough to stop him. He did not need the Viremont estate. He wanted it. There was a difference, and it was the difference between a man who fights out of hunger and one who fights out of appetite. "He already has a solicitor watching the estate registers," Hadley said. "I became aware of it last month, but said nothing. because I thought the risk was theoretical. The will appeared sealed. He found the codicil, too. I believe so, my lord. Alaric exhaled. Not quite a sigh, not quite a curse. Something in between. He moved to his desk and sat down. The leather creaked. Outside, the ground staff had disappeared. The lawn was empty now, and the pewter sky had gone the color of iron. The child, he said. Where are they? Hadley withdrew a second sheet from beneath the first. This one was older, the ink faded to brown at the edges. A name, an approximate birth year, and the name of a coastal town 3 days' ride to the northwest. He slid it across the desk. Alaric looked at it for a long time. She, he said. Pardon? You said the child. She is a woman now. She would be, 7 and 20? 26 by our reckoning. 26. A life had happened somewhere, in a coastal town, while Alaric had been managing a title and a grief and a quiet, grinding obligation to a legacy he had not asked for, a life his father had made possible and then refused to acknowledge. He picked up the sheet. He read the name, Mara Elowen. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his inner pocket, and stood. Prepare my travel documents, he said, and say nothing of this to anyone. If Rook is watching the registers, he may have people watching this house. And if he already knows where she is, then I need to get there first. The town of Creswick sat on a horseshoe of gray coastline that had no interest in being picturesque and made no apologies for it. The harbor smelled of fish and tar, and the particular kind of salt that had soaked into old wood for so long it had become part of the grain. The buildings were low, practical, and slightly weathered in the way that everything was weathered here, not by neglect, but by routine exposure to weather that simply did not care. Alaric found it vaguely hostile and completely unlike anything he owned. He had left his carriage 2 miles back at the inn and come the rest of the way on foot, which had been his solicitor's advice. A crested carriage rolling into a working fishing town, asking questions about a local woman, would remember itself as an event for years. A man in a plain traveling coat was merely a man. He found the boatyard without difficulty. There was only one, and it sat at the east end of the harbor where the land crooked and the wind hit sideways. A handwritten sign above the gate read, Elowen Repairs, established by necessity. He stood at the gate for a moment, reading that sign. Then he went in. The yard was cluttered in the organized way of people who know exactly where everything is and resent having that fact questioned. Keels rested on trestles. Tools hung on pegs in a specific, deliberate order. A small sloop sat in a dry cradle, her hull stripped to bare wood and half recalked, the gap lines run with fresh oakum that hadn't dried yet. A woman was working on the hull. She was crouched near the waterline seam, pressing oakum into a gap with a wooden chisel and a mallet. She didn't look up. We're closed to walk-ins until Thursday, she said. If you need a quote, there's a board on the gate. I didn't come about a boat, Alaric said. She kept working. The mallet struck the chisel in an even rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Then I'm afraid I can't help you, she said. This is a boatyard. I'm looking for a woman named Mara Elowen. The mallet stopped. She didn't move immediately. She set the chisel down carefully, wiped her hand on the cloth tucked into her belt, and then stood. She was medium height, lean in the way of people who work with their bodies and don't think about it, with dark hair pinned back in a rough knot and calluses that were visible across 3 knuckles of each hand. Her eyes, when she turned to look at him, were gray. His eyes were gray, too. He noted it. He suspected she did as well. She gave no sign of it. "You've found her," she said. "Who's asking?" "My name is Alaric Viremont." The name landed. He watched her face. There was a flicker of something, recognition maybe, that she smoothed away before it could settle. Her expression remained exactly as it had been, attentive, guarded, giving nothing. I know the name, she said. I expected you might. I expected you'd show up eventually. She reached for a rag hanging from the cradle and wiped her other hand. You've got 11 years of eventually to explain. I'd start with that. It was not the opening Alaric had prepared for. He had prepared for denial, for anger, for a woman who would need to be convinced she existed at all in his father's story. He had not prepared for someone who already knew and had simply been waiting to see how long it would take. Can we speak somewhere more? Here is fine, she said. I don't bring strangers inside. He accepted that. He was standing in a boatyard in a traveling coat, negotiating with a woman he discovered existed 4 days ago, and she had already established the terms of engagement without asking his opinion. He filed that away and began again. You know who I am, he said. I know who your father was, she corrected. I know what he owed and chose not to pay. I know the name Viremont the way you know the name of a debt, not fondly. He left a will. I assumed. Men like him always do. There is a clause. It requires your acknowledgement, or a formal waiver of claim, before the estate can pass fully to me. Without it, the inheritance is suspended. Mara studied him. She had the stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time reading the sea and had learned to apply the same patience to people. What kind of acknowledgement, she said. That you exist, that you are his natural child, that the estate has formally recognized you. And then what? I'm supposed to be grateful? No, Alaric said. Then you're free. I'm not here to fold you into the family. I'm here because without your acknowledgement, I lose land my family has held for 3 centuries to a man who will strip it for profit. She tilted her head slightly. Something shifted in her face. Still not warmth exactly, but a kind of sharpened interest. You need something from me, she said. Yes. And you came yourself. Not a solicitor. Not a letter. Letters can be ignored, and I find solicitors make people feel like problems to be managed. She almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but it was close. What are you offering? She asked. He told her. A stay at Viremont, long enough to satisfy the legal requirement, perhaps a fortnight, perhaps 4 weeks. She would be introduced as his father's acknowledged daughter. She would need to attend certain functions, be seen in certain company, and sign a document before a notary. In exchange, a sum of money significant enough that he named it plainly, and a written agreement that once the clause was satisfied, she was free to return to her life and had no further obligation to him or to the estate. She heard all of it without interrupting. And if I say no, she asked, then I go home and deal with Lord Rook and eventually lose the land. That's not your problem. You didn't make this clause. She looked at him steadily. This was clearly not the answer she'd expected either. You're not going to threaten me, she said. It wasn't a question. What would be the point? You didn't ask for this. My father created this. I'm asking you to help me solve it, not demanding it. The wind off the harbor was cold and smelled of brine. Somewhere in the yard a chain clinked against a mast. I have terms, she said. Name them. No lies. Not to me, not about me. I don't care what face you put on for your guests or your rival lords. That's your world, not mine. But when you speak to me, you speak plainly. Agreed. No control. My time, my movements, my opinions. You don't own me because I sign a paper. Agreed. And no pretending, she said. Her voice didn't change, but something behind it did. We are strangers, You're not my family. I'm not your sister. I'm a woman doing a job for pay." He looked at her for a moment, then, "Agreed." "Then I'll come," she said. "Thursday. I have work to finish." She turned back to the hull. She picked up the chisel and the mallet. The conversation was evidently over. Alaric walked out through the gate, past the sign, and stood in the coastal wind for a moment. Then he started back toward the inn. He had not expected to feel something akin to respect. He noted it and told himself it was irrelevant, and believed neither. She brought one bag. It was a canvas hold-all, salt-stained around the base, with a buckle that had been repaired with a length of copper wire. It contained, by Alaric's estimation, less than most of his guests brought for an afternoon visit. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about the carriage, which was well sprung and clearly expensive, and had the Viremont crest on the door. She got in, set the bag on her knee, and looked out the window with the expression of someone doing an inventory of a new harbor, assessing, cataloging, giving nothing away. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour. "How long have you known?" he asked. She didn't look away from the window. 15 years. There was a woman in town, old now, dead last winter, who'd been a nurse in the city when she was young. She recognized my mother's surname. Said she'd been at a house in the capital when my mother was there. Said the man she worked for had gray eyes and a crest above his door. She paused. I was 12. I didn't fully understand it then. I did by 14. You could have come forward. I could have, she agreed. I chose not to. She said it simply, without anger, the way you'd state a tide table. I didn't want anything from a man who'd hidden me like an embarrassment. I still don't. Alaric absorbed this. Then why come now? She did look at him then. Her gray eyes were direct and without sentiment. Because you asked plainly, she said. Because you didn't pretend it was anything other than what it is. And because the money is real. She turned back to the window. I have a yard to keep. I have 2 men I pay in winter. This makes that easier. He thought about that for a while. My father, he began. Don't, she said. Quiet, but firm. Not yet. I don't know you well enough to have that conversation. He closed his mouth. The carriage rolled on. The coast road gave way to forest, and the light changed to something amber and intermittent as the trees thickened. What should I know, she said eventually, about the house, the people? He was grateful for the practical ground. He told her, the staff, their names and dispositions, the upper house and the guest quarters where she'd be placed, the solicitor Hadley Morse, who was trustworthy, the groundskeeper who was loyal, and carefully Lord Cassian Rook, who would hear of her arrival within 48 hours and would almost certainly seek access to her. He'll try to find a weakness, Alaric said, something that undermines the legitimacy of the acknowledgement. Inconsistencies in your story, your background, whether you can be pressured to change your position. What do you want me to do about that? Be exactly who you are, he said. Rook deals in people who can be repositioned, people who want something badly enough to shift. You have already made clear that you don't want the estate. You want a transaction and then your freedom. That's very difficult to manipulate. She considered this. And the people in the house, she said. Do they know why I'm here? The staff have been told you are my father's acknowledged daughter who has lived quietly at the coast. They've been told to treat you accordingly. And what they actually think is that I've done something unprecedented and uncomfortable and probably necessary. They are professionals. They will be courteous, but not warm. He hesitated only slightly. I cannot promise warmth. I didn't ask for it, she said. Courteous is enough. It was dusk when Viremont appeared through the tree line, first the gatehouse, then the long approach, and then the house itself. 4 stories of pale stone, symmetrical, austere, lit in the failing light with a kind of cold grandeur that had nothing to do with welcome. Mara looked at it without flinching. "It's a lot of stone," she said. It was, Alaric supposed, as honest an assessment as anyone had ever made of the place. "Yes," he said. The carriage pulled through the gates. The housekeeper was a woman named Mrs. Glane, who had managed Viremont for 23 years, raised 3 generations of junior staff to professionalism, and once removed a guest hunting dog from the dining room without anyone noticing the dog had been there. She was unflappable in the way that only people who have survived sufficient chaos can be. She met Mara at the bottom of the main staircase with a careful measuring look, said, "Good evening, Miss Elowen. Your room is prepared," and led her up without another word. Mara followed. She noticed everything. The house was very quiet and very clean in the way that large houses with many staff and few inhabitants always were. A disciplined quiet, a managed cleanliness that had nothing to do with lived-in comfort. The floors were polished to a color just short of mirror. The portraits on the upper landing were all men. They all had gray eyes. She did not look at them for long. Her room was at the east end of the guest corridor. Good light, facing the gardens, a bed large enough to fit 4 of her beds in Creswick. She thanked Mrs. Glane. The housekeeper withdrew. Mara set her bag on the chair beside the window, which was the chair least likely to damage anything if the bag dripped, and stood in the middle of the room for a moment. The ceiling was high. The curtains were heavy. The fire had been lit and was burning with the careful restraint of a fire that knew its place. She did not unpack immediately. She went to the window instead and looked out at the gardens. They were large, formal, and immaculately kept. Topiary that had probably taken 20 years to achieve its current shape. A central path of pale gravel between box hedges trimmed to the millimeter. Not a weed, not a stray branch. Not one thing that had been allowed to grow in a direction it hadn't been told to. She thought of the boatyard, the comfortable disorder of tools that knew where they belonged, the smell of new wood and old sea. Then she turned away from the window and began to unpack. Dinner was at 7. She arrived at 7 in the same clothes she'd traveled in because her bag contained no formal wear, and found that Alaric had anticipated this and arranged, with impressive quiet efficiency, for a dressmaker to come from the nearby town before she woke. The clothes were already in the wardrobe. 3 gowns, plain but well made, in colors that would not look out of place at any table. She wore the dark green. It fit. She made a note to ask later how he'd known her measurements and thought better of it, because she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. There were 3 at dinner, Alaric, herself, and a neighboring lord named Brethwick, who had arrived that afternoon, apparently a fixture of weekly visits. Brethwick was 60, had a red face and a hearty laugh, and treated her with the warm, slightly excessive courtesy of a man who had been given a private briefing and was determined to get it right. She was courteous back. She asked about his estate. She listened when he answered. She did not pretend to be what she wasn't. She offered no false anecdotes about a childhood she'd never had, no invented memories of a father who'd been absent. And when Brethwick asked how long she'd been at the coast, she said plainly, "All my life. I repair boats. It's honest work." Brethwick blinked. Then he laughed, genuinely this time, and said he wished more people in his acquaintance had something so concrete to say about themselves. Alaric across the table said nothing, but he was watching. After dinner, walking back to her room through the gallery, she stopped in front of the largest portrait. A man in formal dress, 50 or so in the painting, gray-eyed and square-jawed, and holding his coat like something he'd won. She stood there for a long moment. Then she kept walking. He came on the 4th day. He arrived as he always arrived, unannounced and perfectly timed, his carriage appearing at the gatehouse at precisely the hour when the staff were occupied and the house was least organized to receive visitors. He was admitted by the footman before Alaric had been informed, and by the time Alaric reached the entrance hall, Rook was already standing in it, looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man pricing a property. "Alaric," he said pleasantly. He was dark-haired, well-dressed, with the kind of face that was handsome in the way that knives are handsome, clean lines, no softness, made for a specific purpose. "Cassian," Alaric said, "I wasn't expecting you." "No? I imagine not." Rook smiled. It reached his eyes, which was more unsettling than if it hadn't. "I heard a rumor you'd had a guest arrive. Unusual circumstances." "Unusual circumstances are generally private." "Of course." Rook turned, languid, unhurried. "Forgive the intrusion. I had business nearby and thought, well, old habits." He had no business nearby. He had ridden 3 hours. Alaric noted both and said nothing. Mara appeared at the top of the staircase. She had been in the library, working through a navigation chart she'd found there, with an interest that was, Alaric had observed, entirely genuine and entirely unperformed. She must have heard voices. She came down the stairs without hurry, chart still in her hand, and stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. Her eyes went to Rook. She read him the way she had read Alaric on the 1st day. Openly, directly, making no pretense of the assessment. "This must be her," Rook said. "Miss Elowen," Alaric said carefully. "Lord Cassian Rook, a neighbor." "My lord," she said. The courtesy was in her voice, not her posture. Her posture was unchanged, easy, grounded, completely indifferent to the quality of his clothes or the weight of his title. "Remarkable," Rook said, almost to himself. He was looking at her with an interest that had nothing sentimental in it. "You really did find her?" "I really did," Alaric said. "I wonder," Rook said, his tone light as good weather, "if Miss Elowen would care for a short walk before dinner. The South Gardens are particularly fine this time of year. I'd love to—" "No," Mara said. Rook paused. The pause was very small, but it was real. "I beg your pardon. I'd rather not," she said. Perfectly even, perfectly polite. "Thank you for the offer." She looked at Alaric. "The chart in the East Library, the Coastal Survey from 1804. Is it catalogued? I can't find a reference number." "I'll have Hadley look into it," Alaric said. She nodded, tucked the chart under her arm, and went back up the stairs. Rook watched her go. When she was out of sight, he turned back to Alaric with the same pleasant expression. "She's not what I expected," he said. "She rarely is," Alaric said. "I'll have your horse brought round." Rook laughed. It was genuine and slightly annoyed, and he let Alaric see both. "I'll be back," he said, settling his coat. "I always am." "I know," Alaric said. "Good afternoon, Cassian." That evening, Alaric found her in the East Library. She had spread the coastal chart across the reading table and was marking something in pencil. Light, small marks, the kind you could erase. "That man will come back," she said without looking up. "Yes." "What does he want, specifically?" Alaric pulled out the chair across from her. "Something that undermines the acknowledgement, a reason that the clause hasn't been satisfied. He needs either proof that you're not who we say you are, or your cooperation in signing the wrong document." "He'll try to speak to me alone." "Yes." "And you'd like me to refuse." "I would prefer it, but I won't order it." He paused. "That was the agreement." She looked up then. She studied him for a moment. "He's dangerous," she said. It wasn't a question. "He is very patient and very persistent, and he has money to match both." "Yes." She looked back at the chart. "I can read people," she said. It was not a boast. She said it the way she'd say she could read tide tables. "In my work, you meet a lot of men who want something for less than it's worth. You learn to see it in the first sentence." She made another small mark on the chart. "He wants what you have, and he doesn't care what gets in the way. I've met fishermen like that. They're the ones who don't come back." Alaric was quiet for a moment. "What gave him away?" he asked. "He looked at me the same way he looked at the ceiling," she said, "like something he was deciding whether to buy." The 10th day. She found the letters in the archive. She had not been told to stay out of the archive. The house had no formal restrictions on her movement, and she had a habit of exploring in the early mornings when the staff were occupied and the house was still. The archive was in the north wing, a room of wooden drawers and labeled boxes and the particular smell of very old paper. She was not looking for anything specific. She was simply looking. The drawer was labeled with her mother's name. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she opened it. There were 17 letters. They were in her mother's hand. She recognized it from the 3 letters she still had, kept in a tin box under the counter at the boatyard. The handwriting was the same, neat, slightly cramped, the letters pressed a little harder than necessary, the way her mother wrote when she was careful about something. The letters were addressed to the Duke who would become her father. She read them. It took an hour. By the end, she was sitting on the floor of the archive with her back against the wooden shelves and the letters in her lap and her hands very still. Her mother had not been abandoned. That was not the whole truth. The whole truth was harder and sharper and explained things that had never quite made sense. Her mother had been offered money to disappear. She'd refused, not for her own sake, but for the child's. She'd written again and again, not asking for love or acknowledgement or even a name, but for confirmation that the child would be safe, that no one would come looking, that whatever game was playing out in the capital, the child would not be a piece of it. And the Duke had written back, twice, short letters in his hand. She'd seen his signature on documents. She recognized it. The first said, "She will be kept from this. You have my word." The second, written 6 months before his death, "The codicil is written. Whatever I fail to give, she will have what is owed." Mara sat on the archive floor and looked at the far wall. She'd spent 15 years believing her father was a man who'd made a mistake and chosen erasure over accountability. That was a story she understood. It was clean. It explained the anger and let her keep it. This was something else, not good. She was not going to let it become good. He had hidden her from something and decided silence was protection. And that was a man making choices about someone else's life without asking. She knew the difference between being hidden out of shame and being hidden out of fear. Both left you hidden. But it was not the same thing. She put the letters back carefully. She closed the drawer. She sat for another few minutes, then got up, smoothed her skirt, and walked back through the house. She did not look for Alaric. She was not ready for that conversation. She went to the window at the end of the guest corridor and looked out at the formal gardens and stood there for a long time, thinking about the difference between what she'd come here carrying and what she was carrying now. She found him in the study after supper. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She closed the door behind her and stood in the middle of the room. "Did you know?" she said. He looked up from the correspondence he'd been reading. His expression shifted, not to guilt exactly, but to something careful. "About the letters," he said. "Yes." A pause. "I found them 3 years ago," he said. "I was cataloging the archive. I sat with them for a long time before I made any decision." "Did you read them?" "Yes." "And you said nothing." I said nothing, he agreed. There was no evasion in it. I told myself the codicil was the active document, that what mattered was finding you and satisfying the clause. The letters were. I didn't know how to. He stopped. He put the pen down. That's not good enough. She looked at him steadily. No, it isn't. I should have told you they existed when I came to find you, before you agreed to any of this. Yes. The fire crackled. Outside, the night wind had come up and was running along the stone eaves. Why didn't you? She asked. Not with anger now, with the real question, the one she'd been carrying up the corridor. He was quiet for a moment. Because I thought you'd say no, he said at last. And I needed you to say yes. And that was the choice my father would have made. Control the information, protect the outcome. He said it the way she said uncomfortable things, plainly, without performance. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment longer. He wasn't only ashamed of me, she said. That's what the letters say. No, Alaric agreed. He was frightened. There were people. I've been trying to piece it together. There was a creditor, before I was old enough to understand finances, who had leverage I've never fully identified. I believe your existence was something he held as, I don't know the right word. A vulnerability, she said. Yes. She let out a slow breath. That doesn't make it right, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. But it's true, as best I can determine. She nodded once. She turned toward the door. Mara. She stopped. He hadn't used her name before. Only Miss Elowen. Only the courtesy of distance. She turned back. I'm sorry, he said. For the letters. That was mine to control, and I chose wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. The apology was real. She could tell. She'd built a living out of telling. It didn't fix anything, but it was real. Don't do it again, she said. We agreed. No strategy between us. Yes, he said. We did. She left. He sat in the study for a long time after the door closed, looking at the fire. Rook came back on the 14th day. He came with an invitation, a gathering at Thornmere, his own estate, the following week, a dinner and a small society of local landowners. He addressed the invitation to Alaric and extended it, with particular warmth, to Miss Elowen. Alaric read it and said nothing useful. Mara read it and said, What does he want to show me? At Thornmere, his power, his standing, what he has and what he could offer, to someone who might be willing to change their position. He wants to convince me to waive the claim, or something that functions similarly. She set the letter down. We should go. He looked at her. Going to his house is giving him an advantage, he said. Or it's giving me information, she said. I'd like to see him on his own ground. People are different there, less careful, and I want to see what he knows about the leverage your father was under. She met his eyes. Because whoever it was, that creditor, that instrument of pressure, if they're still operating, and if Rook has inherited that leverage or bought it. Alaric was quiet for a moment. Then he's not just trying to acquire the estate through legal maneuver, he said. He's holding something, she said. That's what I want to know. It was, he thought, a remarkably precise and cold piece of reasoning for someone who had arrived a fortnight ago with a canvas hold-all and no interest in politics. You've been thinking about this for days, he said. I've been listening for 2 weeks, she said. Your staff talk, not to me, around me, which is more useful. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, What have you heard? She told him. It was, piece by piece, a coherent picture. A name that came up twice in whispered conversations in the corridor. Not Rook's name, but a name associated with Rook's, a solicitor in the city with a reputation for holding property documents in trust and releasing them at exceptional personal cost. A man named Fenwick. Alaric's expression shifted. "Fenwick," he said. "You know it." "He handled my father's early debts. I thought the relationship ended 20 years ago." "I don't think it did," she said. He stood. He went to the window. He stood there for a while, working it through. "If Rook has Fenwick," he said slowly, "then he has access to whatever instruments Fenwick held, including whatever he used against your father." "Then the clause wasn't just neglect," Alaric said. "It was also protection. If the estate remained in suspension, it was harder to attack directly." She nodded. "So we go to Thornmere," he said. "We go to Thornmere," she said. "And I talk to Rook, and we find out what Fenwick is holding and whether we can get to it before he chooses to use it." He turned from the window. "You are." He stopped. "Practical," she said. "It's the same as navigating. You need to know the chart before you need the chart." Thornmere was the opposite of Viremont in every meaningful way. Where Viremont was pale stone and discipline, Thornmere was dark wood and deliberate grandeur, a house that announced itself at every opportunity. The dining room held 30. The silver was excessive. Rook sat at the head of his table with the ease of a man who had arranged every variable in the room and was pleased with the result. Mara sat 4 seats down, between a landowner's wife who was nervous and a barrister who wasn't. She ate well. She listened to everything. After dinner, Rook managed to extract her from the drawing room with the smooth inevitability of a man who'd orchestrated it before the plates were cleared. A door, a corridor, a room that was quieter and warmer and had 2 chairs arranged near a fire as though they'd been placed there specifically. She sat. He sat. He poured wine she didn't touch. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People keep saying that," she replied. He smiled. It was a better smile than she expected, more genuine, less constructed. She filed that away. Genuinely charming was more dangerous than performance. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "Please," she said. He told her, in the careful, measured language of a man who'd prepared this, that the clause Alaric was relying on was fragile, that her acknowledgment as a natural child could be challenged on multiple grounds, that any competent solicitor could raise questions about lineage, about timing, about the validity of a codicil witnessed by a dead physician and an elderly reverend, and that if there was any legal question about the acknowledgment, any at all, the estate would remain in suspension indefinitely. "There are people who would pay you well," he said, "to simply do nothing, to return to Creswick and make no formal claim. Without the waiver, without the acknowledgment, the clause goes unsatisfied. The estate stays suspended, and you petition the court," she said. He tilted his head. "You understand the mechanism." "I understand leverage," she said. She kept her voice easy, conversational. "Someone told you about Fenwick." The stillness that crossed his face was brief but real. "I don't know who—" "You have his instruments," she said. "The ones from your father's debts. You've been holding them in case the clause became relevant. You didn't know about me 3 months ago. When you found out, you went to Fenwick." She watched his face. There it was. Not guilt, but the rearrangement of a man recalculating. "You're very well informed for someone who arrived a fortnight ago," he said. "I listen," she said. "It's a skill." A pause. The fire shifted. "What do you want?" he said. The pleasantness had not left. He was too good for that. But something had shifted underneath it. "Nothing from you," she said. "I'm going to sign the acknowledgment. I'm going to satisfy the clause. And then I'm going home." The instruments will need a clause to attach to, she said. If the estate isn't suspended, they don't have a door to knock on. You know that. I suspect you've always known that, which is why you came to me, rather than playing the legal card immediately. He was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, short, not quite amused, but real. You negotiated contracts in a boatyard, he said. Every day for 8 years, she agreed. Shall I tell Alaric to have his solicitor contact yours about the Fenwick instruments? It would be cleaner for everyone if they were returned to the estate directly. I expect you'd like this to end without public process. Rook sat back in his chair. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who had come to buy a boat and found himself the one being sold. You have your father's nerve, he said. She stood. She smoothed her skirt. I have my own nerve, she said. Good evening, my lord. The formal acknowledgment ceremony was not required to be public. It was a legal document, a notary, 2 witnesses. It could have been done quietly in the study. Rook made it public. 3 days before the scheduled signing, a notice appeared in the county register, not filed by Rook directly, but by Fenwick's office, on behalf of an unnamed interested party, raising a formal objection to the acknowledgment on grounds of insufficient evidence of lineage. The objection required a hearing before a justice of the peace. It required Mar to appear and answer questions about her parentage, her mother's history, her connection to the Viremont estate. It required her to do it in front of the county. The hearing was set for Thursday morning in the justice rooms of the town hall. Alaric sent his solicitor immediately with 3 documents: the physician's original record of birth, the codicil, and the Reverend Crane's witness statement, which Hadley had been quietly extracting from the old man for the past week with a patience Alaric privately admired. Mara read all 3. It's enough, she said. It should be legally sufficient, Hadley said. But the objection is not really about sufficiency. It's about publicity. Rook wants a public record of dispute. He wants Miss Elowen's name attached to the word questioned in a document that people can read. She set down the papers. He wants me to refuse to appear, she said. If I don't come, the objection stands. Yes, Hadley said. She stood. I'll be there on Thursday, she said. The justice rooms were full. It was a small county, and this was an unusual event, and people came the way they came to anything unusual, not maliciously mostly, but with the reliable human appetite for watching things resolve. The gallery held perhaps 60. Rook was not present. He'd sent Fenwick, who was a small, precise man in a black coat, who arranged his papers with the care of someone who had done this many times. Mara sat beside Hadley at the respondents' table. She wore the dark green gown. She sat straight. She folded her hands on the table. Alaric sat in the gallery. He had offered to sit beside her, and she had said no. This is mine to answer. He'd accepted that. The justice, an older man named Cartwright, who had the look of someone who'd stopped being impressed by men with money sometime in his 40s, read the objection aloud. He asked Mara to confirm her name, her place of birth, and her connection to the late Duke. She answered plainly and clearly. No embellishment, no performance. Her mother's name, the town, the date, the facts as they were. Fenwick raised 4 points of challenge. Hadley answered 3 of them with documents. The 4th, the question of her mother's relationship to the Duke, whether it was what she claimed. Fenwick pressed harder. He called into question whether the record of birth was accurate, whether the physician who wrote it could be trusted, whether the Reverend's memory at his age was reliable. The room was quiet. Mara looked at Justice Cartwright. "May I speak?" she said. He nodded. She spoke for 7 minutes. Not a speech. She was not a person who made speeches. She stated facts. She described what her mother had told her. the letters she'd found in the archive, what they said and what they meant. She described the codicil in her father's hand. She described what Rook wanted and why, and she named it plainly and without accusation. As a legal strategy, as a maneuver, as something any competent observer in the room could identify for what it was. She finished by saying, "I did not come to Viremont to claim an inheritance. I came to satisfy a legal obligation at a man's request, in exchange for fair compensation. I have done what was asked. The documents are valid. The only reason this hearing exists is that someone finds my compliance inconvenient." The room was very quiet. Justice Cartwright looked at Fenwick. Fenwick straightened his papers. Cartwright dismissed the objection. Outside the town hall on the steps, with the morning light flat and cold and the county dispersing around them, Alaric came down the steps and stood beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "That was well done," he said. "It was the truth," she said. "That makes it easier." A pause. The street noise rose and settled around them. "You could have left yesterday," he said. "Cartwright would have ruled without you." "Possibly," she said. "But I wanted to be there." He looked at her. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. The wind came down the street and moved a strand of hair across her face, and she pushed it back. "Because this is the last thing that has to happen in my name in relation to this estate," she said. "I wanted to be the one who said it." The notary came on Friday. The document was 3 pages. The signing took 11 minutes. The 2 witnesses were Hadley and Mrs. Glane, who had been asked and had agreed with a gravity that suggested she understood what she was participating in. Mara signed her name carefully in the same slightly cramped hand as her mother. Then she capped the pen, pushed back the chair, and stood. "That's done," she said. "That's done," Hadley agreed. He looked more relieved than he'd probably intended. They took tea in the study afterward. Alaric, Mara, Hadley, Mrs. Glane. It was not quite a celebration, but it was not one either. There were biscuits. Mrs. Glane allowed herself a second. Afterward, Hadley left. Mrs. Glane left. The study was quiet. Alaric poured the last of the tea and handed her the cup. She took it. "Rook," she said. "His solicitor contacted Hadley this morning. The Fenwick instruments will be returned. He wants a quiet end to it." "He'll try again some day," she said. "Different approach." "Yes, but not this approach, and not with this particular—" He paused, searching for the word. "Leverage?" she offered. "I was going to say weapon, but yes." She drank her tea. The fire was low, and the room smelled of old paper and wood smoke. "I'd like to leave Sunday," she said. "If that's fine," he said. "The carriage will be ready." A pause. "The money transferred to your account in Creswick yesterday," he said. "I had Hadley arrange it before the hearing, in case—" She looked at him. "In case it went badly," he said. "I wanted you to have it regardless." She was quiet for a moment. "That was—" She stopped. "Thank you," she said, plainly without performance. He nodded. Sunday morning. She had packed the canvas hold-all. The room was as it had been when she arrived, perhaps slightly warmer, because the fire had been burning in it for 3 weeks, but otherwise unchanged. She brought the hold-all downstairs and set it by the door. The carriage was being prepared in the yard. She could hear the horses. Alaric was in the entrance hall. She'd expected him to be in the study, or not yet awake. It was early, but he was there, standing in the entrance hall in his coat, and he handed her something when she came down the stairs. It was a navigation chart, folded carefully, a new one, not the old survey from 1804, but a recent coastal chart, the kind you had to order from a specific cartographer in the city. "Hadley tells me the survey I have is outdated," he said. I thought, you'd said the coastline had shifted east of the harbor. I had this sent for. She looked at it. She looked at him. This took days to order, she said. Yes, he said. I ordered it in the first week. She stood with the chart in her hands for a moment. There were things she could say, things about men and gifts and what they meant and didn't mean, things about fathers who made choices without asking and sons who learned those choices and the moment when the learning began to change. She said none of them. Thank you, she said. She folded it smaller and put it in the hold-all. They walked out to the carriage. At the door of it, she stopped. She turned back. I'll write, she said. If I find anything else in those coastal surveys that contradicts your estate records, you'll want to know. He looked at her. That's... He stopped. Started again. I would like that. Good. She got into the carriage. She put the hold-all on her knee. She looked out the window. He stood at the door. He put one hand briefly on the side of the carriage, the way you'd steady something, and then stepped back. The carriage moved. She didn't look back at the house. She looked forward at the long approach and the tree line and the road that would take her to the coast. But she held the chart, and she thought about the letter she would write. Not right away, not this week, but eventually, when she had something real to say, when she'd had time to decide what kind of thing exactly she was choosing to keep. Not a father. She was not prepared to call him that. Not a stranger. Something in between. Real and cautious and earned, the way useful things always are. The carriage went through the gates. The road opened ahead of her, and the trees thinned, and somewhere far ahead was the salt smell of the coast. She put her hand on the chart and looked at the horizon. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was written in a slightly cramped hand on plain paper. Not estate stationery, not formal. The kind of paper you'd buy in a coastal town where titles mean nothing and nobody cares who your grandfather was. Alaric read it at his desk. It was 2 paragraphs. The first described a discrepancy she'd found between the 1804 coastal survey and the current chart, a navigational shift in the harbor mouth that had implications for the old fishing rights recorded in the estate's boundary documents. She had annotated both charts. She would send them under separate cover. The second paragraph was shorter. It said, "The yard is doing well. One of my men got married last month, the older one with the red beard. I repaired a 30-foot catch last week that had been left in the water for 2 seasons. You would not believe the state of the hull. I am well." That was all. Alaric read it twice. He folded it carefully and put it in the top left drawer of his desk. Not the archive, not the files. The desk drawer, the one he opened every day. Then he took out a sheet of paper. He uncapped his pen. He wrote back. He wrote about the estate, the winter preparations, the boundary survey Hadley had finally completed, Rook's characteristic silence, which was in its way louder than noise. He wrote that the East Library had been reorganized and the 1804 survey properly cataloged. He wrote that Mrs. Glane had asked after her twice, which was Mrs. Glane's version of warmth. He paused before the last paragraph. He wrote, "I am glad you are well. The yard sounds like a place worth coming back to." He stopped. He considered. Then he wrote, "If you come this way for any reason, for the charts, for the archive, for no reason in particular, the room is kept." He signed it. He sealed it. He sent it. Outside, the winter light was thin and gray and without sentimentality. The grounds were bare. The formal gardens had gone to their winter discipline, everything clipped and still and waiting for a season to decide what it wanted to be. He sat at his desk for a while after the letter had gone. He thought about the archive drawer, the letters his father had written, the things held in silence for 11 years, the weight of what was hidden and what the hiding cost. Then he opened the next file and got back to work. There was land to manage, a legacy to hold, and something that had just, very quietly and without fanfare, become a little less like obligation and a little more like choice.